What's up guys, and welcome to 58 Shadeborn, one of the most popular and high DPS Shadeborn variants currently utilized by the rogue community. This spec has fantastic single target damage and really awesome dual target damage as well, making it extremely useful in many of the fights in Nightmare Tide. In this guide I'll show you where to put your soul points, which masteries to select, as well as how to play Shadeborn. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Looking at the soul tree breakdown, you'll see we go 58 points in Shadeborn and 18 in bladedancer. The reason that we do this is because the 61 point strengthened bond for Shadeborn is geared more towards dual target damage, and that's not the intent with this build. So what we do is we pull 3 points out of Welcoming Shadows, which just essentially increases the range of one of the heal abilities that you get, and we put those points in the bladedancer tree. So for the bladedancer tree, we're going to go 5 in ambidextrous for the 10% dexterity increase. We're going to go 5 in blade finesse for the 10% attack power and weapon damage increase. 5 in combat expertise for the flat 10% damage increase, and the last 3 will go 2 in hack and slash for the 4% damage increase from your critical hits, and also for the last one we're going to put it in blade tempo, which is an extremely strong cooldown for this build. And for the tertiary soul, usually you'll pick up 0 assassin, which will give you violent poison, give you a nice little 1 or 2k DPS boost. So that's it for the souls guys. For the masteries, level 61 we take planar replenishment. This is going to allow you while in combat to heal for 25% of your endurance, so pretty good stuff there. But more importantly, it's going to allow your consuming depths, which is a really important proc that you get that does a lot of damage, to have an extra tick. Oh, excuse me, have an extra tick, which is really big, huge DPS increase here. Level 62, we take Ascended Biology. This is going to increase your non-melee abilities range by 5 meters. It makes you don't have a whole lot in Shadeborn, but the ones that you do have will have a 40-meter range, so that's pretty nice. It also increases your healing done and absorption granted by 5%. Alternatively, there's a couple other ones you can look at and check, like this one, Revitalize, for the increase of incoming healing by 3%. However, I would just recommend you do Ascended Biology. Level 63, we have Boundless Energy. This is going to make your damaging abilities have a 20% chance to restore 4 energies. Pretty important stuff there. Level 64, we have Repetitive Strikes. This is going to give you a 6% flat damage increase because of your combo point generating attacks having stacks of repeated strikes. Level 65, of course, we take Energy Manipulation for the free damage that you get there. So that's it for the souls and masteries guys. Now let's go ahead and talk about the macros briefly. So there are quite a few that I use for this build. I am sharing tabs because I do have a lot of builds and the macro system isn't as big as I need it to be. So we are looking over here at this top left here, or the middle left here. Starting with the spam macro, we have a cast shifts Shadow Lash, and then we have cast Scything Night, and then we have cast Shadow Lash. Now you might ask yourself, why do you have Shadow Lash in the macro twice? That's a very good question. So Scything Night is going to be this ability here, and it gives you 2 combo points. And you do not want to waste one of those combo points if you can help it. So what that shift modifier is in there for is when you hit this macro on the 1 key, it's first going to start off and cast your Scything Night. So if Scything Night is off cooldown, it's going to cast it, hands down. But let's say you only have 4 combo points, right? And you're coming up to hit this macro and your Scything Night is available. Well, instead of having to hit another key, you just hold your shift button down and hit 1. And instead of it casting Scything Night, it'll cast Shadow Lash. And Shadow Lash is just your main builder for 1 combo point. After that, you can use your finisher, and then you can use your Scything Night. So this is just a way you can use the macro system in Rift to kind of streamline the build and make sure that you're not wasting any combo points. And you'll see more about this in the rotation section. Also, a quick note for the shift modifiers, if you've never used them before, the default behavior of the shift modifiers is if you use a shift 1, or shift 2, shift 3 like that, it'll change your hotbar loadouts. So you want to go into your keybinds menu and delete the shift +1, shift +2, shift +3 modifiers before you utilize shift modifiers. That's the spam macro. So moving on down to the next macro, we have the finisher macro, same kind of thing. If you hit this on the 2 key, it'll fire off Shadow Flurry, which is your main finisher. But if you hold shift and hit 2, it'll cast off Nexus of Darkness, which is going to give you 5 combo points and also make your next 3 finishers deal 35% more damage. I'll explain more about the usage on this later on. Moving on down, we have the cooldown macro. This is simply just Shadow Twin and Blade Tempo. These are your 2 main cooldowns of your build. Moving on down, we have the heal that you get. This one is the Shadow Restoration. Now, I just made this one so I could label it while I was learning the build. You can actually delete the labels if you want. It's totally up to you. Moving up to the top here, we have a negative 90% here. This is going to be a cooldown that makes you take 90% less damage for 6 seconds. It's actually kind of akin to the Riftstalker one. The only caveat is that you can't attack during this time. Once you do this, it pretty much takes you out of the fight for 6 seconds. So this is kind of cool if you have like a tank death or something like that. You can pop this, and sometimes it might save your life. So moving on down, we have this guy here. This is Void Touch and Innumerable Shadows. These are 2 really important skills that the Shadeborn gets. So Void Touch is going to have your target take 10% more Shadeborn damage, but with passes in the tree, it makes him take a lot more damage than that. So this is extremely important to have up for all your skills. Innumerable Shadows increases the damage by 10% for 15 seconds. And another cool thing that it does for you is if you use this skill within 4 seconds, your next finisher has a 35-meter range as well. So if you have a disconnect, you can use this guy coupled with like Shadow Flurry if you have combo points to spare to gap a disconnect. So this is macro together to manage together. However, you can manage it separately as well with your 8 and 9 key. That is totally up to you, but I'll explain the usage of this macro and why it works later on in the video. Moving on down, we have 3 charges with this build. We have Sudden Appearance and Shadow Grip, which are both from this tree here, from the Shadeborn tree. And then you also have Flash of Steel, which comes from the bladedancer tree. On the same note, moving on down, we have 2 interrupts with this build as well. We have the Shadow Spire, which comes from your Shadeborn tree. And we also have Weapon Barrage, which is virtually a copy of that skill with a different name from the bladedancer tree. And of course, we have the Break Free macro here, which has your Scything Darkness from the Shadeborn tree and Break Free from your Ascended abilities and Fading Light from your Planar Attunement abilities. So that's it for the macros, guys. Let's go ahead and go over the action bar briefly. So starting at the top left, we have your Virulent Poison here from your Assassin tree. We have Inescapable Bond, which is going to increase your death damage by 5%. We have Energy Manipulation right here, so you can preload that, but it'll be managed for you in your macros, so it's totally up to you again. You can also macro this in with your 30-second cooldowns too, like if you want to put it in your finisher macro. Totally up to you. Moving down to the middle bar here, we have Sidesteps. This is from your bladedancer tree. This is going to increase your dodge by 50%. Doesn't work in a whole lot of bosses and stuff and a whole lot of abilities, but you can use it in like expert dungeons, things like that, PvP, what have you. Moving over to the right, on the Z keybind, we have, this is just my crit pots. On Q keybind, we have the Innumerable Shadows macro. This is going to, again, remember, have your Innumerable Shadows and also your Void Touch in it. On the E key, we have Mirrored Strike. This is going to be another one of those abilities you're going to cast once every 60 seconds. It's going to increase your damage by 10%, so pretty important stuff there. On the R keybind, we have the Cooldown Macro, which is going to have Shadow Twin, Blade Tempo, and then also I believe it has the Energy Manipulation in it as well. So that's it for all those. Actually, it doesn't have Energy Manipulation in it, but you can put it in there if you want to. Moving over to the right a little bit more, these are all 3 of your chargers. We already went over those. Moving down to the main bar, we have the Spam Macro on 1, which is going to have Scything Night and also your Shadow Lash in it. And remember, we have that Shift modifier in there to make sure we're not wasting any of those combo points. On 2, we have the Finisher Macro, which also has your Nexus of Darkness shift on a Shift modifier. On 3, we have Consuming Depths. On 4, we have Strangulate, which is going to be another really important damage over time ability that you get. On 5, we have Bond of Night. Now, this is a really, really important part of Shadeborn, Bond of Night. So whatever target you have, you're going to want to cast Bond of Night on that target, and then you do extra damage to the target on whatever target has Bond of Night. So on a 2-target situation, you'd put Bond of Night on a target, and then you'd fight the other target. And that would give you an increase in your damage that you've done. Now, we'll speak more about that later on in the video as well. On 6, we have Shadow Restoration. This is going to heal you for 10% of the direct damage that you deal to your Bond of Night target, so that's pretty strong stuff, especially if you only have 1 target. On 7, we have your Meld into Darkness, which is your 90% damage reduction for 6 seconds that also debilitates you. On 8, we have Void Touch, which will be cast from your Q macro. On 9, we have Innumerable Shadows, which is also going to be cast from your Q macro. On the 0 key, or middle click, is what I have it mapped to. You have your Charge macro. We have 3 charges in there. For gap closers rather, to deal with disconnects. On the minus key, we have interrupts. If you want to, say there's a fight where you're not going to need to use charges, you can swap these guys around to have easy access to your interrupts. And of course, equal is going to be your standard break free. So that's it for the action bar, guys. Now let's go ahead and talk about K-alerts. There are quite a few that I use for this build just to make sure that they're being tracked correctly. However, a lot of them are just going to be overlays, like this guy and this guy are overlays, this guy and this guy are overlays, and so on and so forth. So let's see what these look like. So starting down here, we have the Nexus of Darkness. This is going to tell you how many stacks of Nexus of Darkness that you have. And it's also going to have one in there that tells you how long until Nexus of Darkness comes up. Now your ticks of Strangulate, which is your damage over time ability, reduce the cooldown on that Nexus of Darkness. So if you forget to cast Nexus of Darkness, during the 30-second block or whatever, and you're worried about your cooldowns lining up, it's not as big of a deal as Shadeborn, because your Strangulate ticks are going to keep this guy up during all your bursts anyway, as long as you're paying attention. Of course, up here we have the Bond of Night. This is going to tell you if it's on your current target. So if you have multiple targets, just make sure that you're being cognizant that it will show up on your not primary target. Moving on down here to the middle here, we have Blade Tempo. This is going to tell you when it's up, this little green burst area will. And this will have a cooldown timer in it, tell you how long until it comes up. Same thing over here, we have it'll tell you the cooldown timer and also how long or while it's up. It'll tell you the timer for how long it's up for. This guy right here is for Consuming Depths. This one's going to give you a timer that lets you know how long you have till it falls off. It only lasts 3 seconds, So basically, during that 3 seconds, you just don't want to use another proc if you have one and overwrite it. We'll talk more about that later. Then, of course, at the bottom here, we just have the Mirrored Strike, which lasts 60 seconds. We have the Strangulate here, which lasts 30 seconds. And then we have Innumerable Shadows and Void Touch, which both last 15 seconds, respectively. So that's it for the K-alerts, guys. It might seem like a lot, but it's actually not. It's pretty relatively easy to deal with. But now we talked about the K-alerts, we'll go ahead and discuss how to play Shadeborn. So the single target rotation with Shadeborn is actually pretty easy. There are a couple of things that you want to note, however. A couple of those things are that, number one, you want to make sure you have Bond of Night on your target at all times, at least your primary target. And the reason for that is because a lot of your damage comes from this Bond of Night mark. It's pretty easy to set up, and there is a K-alert to remind you, so it's not too bad to manage. The other part of that is you have a couple of different abilities here that are your supporting abilities. For instance, Void Touch and Innumerable Shadows. They give you a lot of damage increase. For instance, your Mirrored Strike over here is a finisher. It's going to increase your damage by 10%, last 60 seconds. So every 60 seconds you need to make sure that you're putting this back up, even if you have to clip it a couple seconds. On Innumerable Shadows, this guy right here also gives you a 10% increase in damage as well, so that's a pretty big deal. But an even bigger deal is your Void Touch. Now over here you'll see that Void Touch increases your damage by 10%, but there's a passive in the tree right here that says your Void Touch now increases your Shadeborn damage by 20%. So that's a pretty big bump. So you definitely want to make sure you're not using any hard-hitting abilities with Void Touch not on the target. Specifically your Consuming Depths, because this guy is going to be one of your hardest hitting abilities right here. So now we talked about that, let's go ahead and discuss the rotation a little bit. So when these guys get close to getting off of there, your Innumerable Shadows is off global cooldown, and your Void Touch is on global cooldown. The reason that we can macro these guys together is because Innumerable Shadows has a 1 second cooldown, so when you hit this button, hit Q twice really fast, it'll cast Innumerable Shadows, and then it'll cast Void Touch right after before Innumerable Shadows comes off cooldown. So let's see what this looks like. So we're going to start off by making sure we have the Bond of Night on the target here. Then we're going to go make sure we have our Violent Poison and Inescapable Bond up. Target the boss, we're going to do QQ, and then we're going to go Mirrored Strike, Strangulate, and then we're going to spam our spam macro to our cooldown block. Then Shadow Twin Blade Tempo, Finisher, Shift 2, Finisher, Consuming Depths, and then Scything Night. And then we're going to keep trying to go. You see that our burst is still up here. We're going to use a Finisher. Then to use a 1 key, QQ to refresh, Scything Night, Finisher, and then Consuming Depths. And usually if I have like 3 or 4 combo points and I can fit it into that 0 tick of Shadow Twin, I will try and do that. Just for some extra DPS, and also to see if I can get another proc of the Consuming Depths as well. Shift 2 to use your Nexus of Darkness, followed by a 2 for the finisher, Scything Night, and keep going. Once you get the hang of this, it's actually relatively easy to play, so we're going to use a Shift 1 so we don't waste our Scything Night, and we're going to go ahead and use QQ to refresh those, back to 5 combo points, we proc Consuming Depths, and we're going to keep on going here. You can see we're like just about a minute or so, and we're about to have our Shadow Twin and stuff back up. So now since this Shadow Twin's up, but you want to wait, Nexus of Darkness is up, we're going to use our QQ again, and we're going to keep on going until we get to 5 combo points, and use Shadow Twin, Shift 2 to use the finisher again, Consuming Depths. You're going to keep going. So this is actually kind of hard to narrate, but we keep going with the burst. I'm going to go ahead and stop now. But basically, I did a parse earlier today, and it was about 93 to 95-ish or so. Now, a couple of notes on that before you get all excited about the damage this does. Number one, this guy does do 12% more damage above 90%. I got to find it in the tree here for you guys. I believe it's right here. Yep. You deal 12% more damage to targets above 90% health. So this makes your opening bursts look really good. But after that, it kind of falls off a little bit. So don't get too excited because this is a 100% health dummy. The other thing to note here is that you also have this, Shadow of Demise, which makes you do 3,500 extra damage below 35% health, which I've heard been reported is roughly that 12% increase, again sub 35%. However, I haven't had a chance to actually do the math on the parses to see. However, you do get a sizable chunk of damage increase below 35% health, that's for sure. But that's it for the single target rotation, guys. Very, very simple to do. You're basically operating off of a 30-second, a 60-second, and a 2-minute block. You want to save your blade tempo for every 2 minutes. Even if it's up, you want to make sure you always have Shadow Twin and Nexus of Darkness up for it. So you'll cast it every other time, basically. But now we talked about single target rotation, guys. Let's go ahead and talk about the dual target rotation. The dual target rotation with Shadeborn is actually literally the exact same as the single target one, except for your Bond of Night target is going to change. So you can see we have our 2 dummies here that we're going to be testing on. On the rightmost dummy, I'm going to go ahead and put Bond of Night on that one, and then we're going to do all of our primary damage to our primary one. Now you can change up this K-alert, this Bond of Night K-alert, to only work on your focus if you want, and you can have this guy focus so that way the K-alert doesn't, isn't in your face the whole time. I don't particularly care because I use this mostly for single target, and if it happens to be dual target, then whoopee, cool, I get a DPS increase. So we're going to show you how to do this with this particular setup. So now we have this guy targeted. We're going to start off just like we did before. Make sure that we're buffed. We're going to go ahead and go QQ into an E, into a 4. Make sure we use our consuming depths, and then we're going to go all the way to 5 combo points. And we use RR, 2, shift 2, 2, and 2 consuming depths on 3, back to Scything Night. And we're going to keep on going here. And you can see our burst is significantly higher than it was with a single target. We're going to go ahead and go QQ, into Scything Night, one more 1 key, and then 2 again, into consuming depths again, and then our burst is about to wear off there. So we're going to keep on going here. We got another consuming depths proc, so we're going to keep hitting our 1 key. You can see the majority of the time you're going to be using your 1 key. You're going to go ahead and fit that finisher into those before those wear off. Consuming depths, strangulate, 1 key again, and finisher. Shift 2 for the Nexus of Darkness. Use our 3 key there, and keep on spamming, keep on spamming. So you can see that we're doing still in the 130s or so. Very, very strong QQ to use our Void Touch and Innumerable Shadows again, and keep going with the 1 key here, finisher. So we're about at a minute now. You can see we're like settling into the 120s, 130s, which is about right. I did waste 1 Scything Night, which you definitely want to try not to do. So some notes about that. As I said before, if your Scything Night is up and you hit that 1 key, it's going to fire off Scything Night. So you definitely want to make sure that you're using that shift key. So we'll wait for it to come back up here. So say for instance we just want to use the Shadow Lash in that. We just hold shift down and then hit 1. And you see how it didn't go on cooldown and instead it cast Shadow Lash? That's a way you can not waste combo points if you come up to a block and you have 4 combo points and Scything Night is off cooldown. That's it for the dual target rotation, guys. Shadeborn's actually a lot of fun to play and very rewarding, especially if you get good with managing your cooldowns and making sure you're not clipping consuming depths and all that stuff. So it's definitely worth a roll slot, guys. But that's it. If you guys have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps me out. And I will see you guys next time.